Oh, Jerusalem. President Donald Trump recognizes the ancient city as Israel's capital. We'll have team coverage, including the Pope's heartfelt appeal. Call for peace. Church leaders in Honduras ask for patience as the country tries to determine who won last week's presidential election. The voice of the silent majority. Leading conservative writer and historian Lee Edwards is in the studio to discuss his new memoir. And the real Santa Claus. Today's feast day honors St. Nicholas of Bari, a beloved figure in the Catholic and Orthodox churches. On EWTN News Nightly for Wednesday, December 6th, 2017.
I have determined that it is time to officially recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel.
President Trump making history as he directs the government to move the U.S. Embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, despite opposition from world leaders and even the Pope. Good evening from Washington, D.C., and thank you to those of you joining us from around the world for news from a Catholic perspective. I'm Lauren Ashburn. We have team coverage tonight, bringing you all angles of the announcement. Wyatt Goolsbee, Global Reaction. Juliette Lindley in Rome tells us what Pope Francis is saying, and Jason Calvi questions lawmakers. We begin with correspondent Mark Irons at the White House. Good evening, Mark.
Good evening, Lauren. The president's announcement today is unprecedented. The U.S. has never endorsed Israel's claim of sovereignty over any part of Jerusalem. Critics say it will hurt Israeli-Palestinian peace efforts, but the president argues this move is long overdue.
My announcement today marks the beginning of a new approach to conflict between Israel and the Palestinians.
President Trump's decision to recognize Jerusalem as Israel's capital sparks worldwide controversy. It upends decades of U.S. policy, but makes good on a campaign commitment.
I promised to look at the world's challenges with open eyes and very fresh thinking.
As part of the declaration, President Trump instructs the State Department to begin a multi-year process to move the U.S. Embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, breaking precedent that goes back over 20 years. Presidents since Bill Clinton have signed a waiver every 6 months that keeps the U.S. Embassy from moving due to security concerns. Trump will only continue to sign that waiver until logistics for the move are worked out. And the White House promises the Holy City's physical and political borders will not be compromised.
This is a long overdue step to advance the peace process and to work towards a lasting agreement.
Something Trump calls the deal of the century, peace between Israelis and Palestinians who view East Jerusalem as their capital. A confident President Trump understands he may not quiet the concerns.
There will, of course, be disagreement and dissent regarding this announcement. But we are confident that ultimately, as we work through these disagreements, we will arrive at a peace and a place far greater in understanding and cooperation.
Despite today's announcement, the White House says the president is still open to a two-state solution in a Mideast peace agreement. And Lauren, it's worth mentioning the White House is buzzing today with foreign media, all interested in the ramifications of this historic announcement.
White House correspondent Mark Irons, thank you. Protesters gather in Gaza before the president's announcement today. It came as world leaders voiced their concerns about the move. And here for that world leader reaction is correspondent Wyatt Goolsbee at the State Department. Good evening, Wyatt.
Good evening, Lauren. Officials here at the State Department are warning American citizens visiting or traveling or working in Israel not to travel to Jerusalem's Old City. The warning comes as Arab leaders worry the announcement will halt prospects for peace in the region. Outrage in the Gaza Strip, Lebanon, and across the Middle East. Palestinians take to the streets denouncing President Trump's recognition of Jerusalem as Israel's capital. These Palestinian children are chanting, "Trump, you are mad." The clashes come as high-ranking Arab leaders meet this week in Cairo, Egypt. They say President Trump's decision will inflame Muslims worldwide and could lead to chaos. This Palestinian minister saying Jerusalem was and will stay Arab and the eternal capital of the Palestinian people. The old city of Jerusalem is divided in many ways politically, but there are 4 different official quarters: the Christian, Jewish, Muslim, and Armenian quarters. Israeli Jews and Palestinian Muslims make up the vast majority of the population. Britain's foreign minister says it's up to both groups to negotiate the issue.
We think that Jerusalem obviously should be part of the final settlement between the Israelis and the Palestinians, a negotiated settlement that we want to see.
But some welcome the president's decision. Israel's prime minister calls it a historic day.
President Trump, thank you for today's historic decision to recognize Jerusalem as Israel's capital. The Jewish people and the Jewish state will be forever grateful.
Leaders of major Christian denominations in the Holy Land are asking the president to rethink the decision. In a letter, they say the step will mean increased hatred, conflict, violence, and suffering. Now, that letter is signed by all the city's major Christian leaders, including Archbishop Pizzaballa, who has been appointed by the Pope to help run the Catholic Church in Jerusalem. Now, they want the president to continue to recognize the international status of Jerusalem. Lauren?
Correspondent Wyatt Goolsby reporting from the State Department. Thank you, Wyatt. The Vatican is sending out the same message with Pope Francis calling on everyone to respect the status quo of Jerusalem.
Affinché sia impegno di tutti a rispettare lo status quo della città.
The Holy Father asking for wisdom and prudence to prevail to avoid further conflict. Francis made the appeal during his weekly audience. It came after speaking with the Palestinian leader and meeting with a delegation of Palestinian officials in a previously scheduled audience. Juliette Lindley is EWTN News Nightly's Vatican correspondent. She joins us from Rome. Juliette, tell us what the Pope is concerned about.
Now, the Pope is highly concerned about maintaining the international status of Jerusalem, and he's insisting it's a holy city for all 3 religions, Jews, Christians, and Muslims. He's always been very vocal on Israeli-Palestinian affairs, and after his trip to the Holy Land in May 2014, he invited Presidents Abu Mazen and Shimon Peres to the Vatican to pray together in the Vatican Gardens for peace, and that was a very symbolic move to bring the 2 sides together. And more recently, yesterday, Abu Mazen put in a phone call to the pontiff to discuss President Trump's move. And this morning at the general audience, indeed, the Holy Father made his appeal that everyone respect the status quo of the city of Jerusalem under UN regulations.
You mentioned the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. What is the Vatican's official position on that?
Now, the Holy See instituted full diplomatic ties with Israel in 1994, whereas 21 years later, in June 2015, it officially recognized the state of Palestine. So the Vatican said at the time that it hoped that the accord would help put an end to the conflict. And in essence, the Vatican has always made attempts to bring peace to the Holy Land because, of course, it is the cradle of Christianity and a fulcrum of stability across the Middle East. And Lauren, let's remember that in addition to the Christian presence in Jerusalem and in Israel, many Christians also live in Palestine.
Now, you mentioned previous popes and the Vatican always playing a role in the peace process. Give us a little history of that.
Yeah, so if we look at more recent history, Pope St. John Paul II in 2000 signed a basic accord with the former leader of the PLO, Yasser Arafat, saying that peace in the Holy Land ought to be based on UN resolutions and that Jerusalem should be guaranteed as an international city, not as the capital of either one state or of the other. Now, John Paul II then made a surprise visit to the Holy Land just weeks later and went specifically to Jericho in the Palestinian territories in a symbolic move in support of the 2-state solution. Now, more recently, Pope Benedict visited the Holy Land in 2009 and was similarly vocal in his calls for peace and for a recognized Palestinian state according to international law. And Pope Francis visited in 2014, as we mentioned, meeting the leaders of both sides and following in the footsteps of his predecessors, pleading for what he called an end to an increasingly unacceptable situation.
Juliette Lindley, EWTN News Nightly Vatican correspondent. Thank you so much for that report.
Thank you, Lauren.
For decades here in Washington, lawmakers of both parties have supported recognizing Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. Correspondent Jason Calvi has more on what looks like flip-flopping by some senators from their positions of past. Good evening, Jason.
Good evening, Lauren. The president's actions today are triggered by a law Congress passed in 1995. It set out to relocate the U.S. Embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. As recently as 6 months ago, the Senate voted to reaffirm that with 90 senators in favor, but now some Democrats are changing their tune.
Senator Patrick Leahy of Vermont voted in June to reaffirm the Jerusalem Embassy Act of 1995. Today I asked him what he thinks now.
I think it's a gross mistake.
But you voted 6 months ago to uphold the Jerusalem Embassy Act.
The act has, because you've always, from the beginning of that act, it's always been a waiver in there.
In 1995, the Jerusalem Embassy Act passed the House overwhelmingly. Democrat Chuck Schumer of New York voted for it.
It is a nation's sovereignty to choose its capital. Israel has chosen Jerusalem. It's about time the United States went along.
The law says Jerusalem should be recognized as the capital of the state of Israel, and it called for the U.S. Embassy to be moved there by 1999. But the law also gives the president the power to waive that deadline 6 months at a time in order to protect national security interests, a step taken by Presidents Clinton, Bush, and Obama. Today, some Democrats are critical of President Trump's decision.
I don't know if he's given thought to the impact it will have, but many of us are concerned.
But Republican Senator Ted Cruz of Texas is commending the president and calling his decision historic.
It's the right thing to do for Israel, and it's the right thing to do for the United States.
Senator, are you worried this is going to lead to bloodshed, though?
You know, if history has shown anything, it is that radical Islamic terrorists don't need an excuse to engage in violence and terrorism.
Democratic leader Chuck Schumer tells the Weekly Standard he urged the president to make this decision. Other Democrats we spoke to, including Senator Ron Wyden of Oregon, also support the move. He tells us he always said the capital of Israel is Jerusalem. Lauren?
Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi. Thank you, Jason. Predictions by a Democratic senator today that Senator Al Franken of Minnesota will resign tomorrow. 6 female Democratic senators, including Senator Kirsten Gillibrand and Claire McCaskill, say it would send a clear message that any kind of mistreatment of women in our society is not acceptable. Minnesota senator is accused by several women of sexual misconduct. And the Senate confirms Kirstjen Nielsen as the Secretary of Homeland Security. Nielsen replaces her old boss, General John Kelly, who is now President Trump's chief of staff. She served as Kelly's chief of staff at DHS. Police officers returned to duty in Honduras after briefly refusing to crack down on protesters. Voters were rebelling after suspected electoral fraud in the presidential election. President Juan Orlando Hernandez says he is open to a review of the disputed vote count, but the opposition candidate wants to redo the entire process. The country is 90% Catholic. Russian President Vladimir Putin says he's running for re-election. Putin has high approval ratings, topping 80%. He has been in power in Russia since 2000, first as president, then prime minister, and president again. References to Jesus Christ have been dropped from the daily prayer used by New Zealand's parliament. Speaker of the House, Trevor Mallard, changed the words last month. The blessing had included the word Jesus since the country was founded 163 years ago. And a Catholic priest in the Philippines is murdered by 4 gunmen. Father Tito Paez, a 72-year-old diocesan priest, died Monday in what a local bishop calls an execution. No arrests have been made. Father Paez worked closely with farmers and the poor. A nun who knew him says, quote, he served people until his last breath. Coming up, wildfires in California. Firefighters are forced to battle another dramatic blaze. We'll tell you how it impacted a Catholic college. And Wall Street woes. Find out why a false report from ABC News caused a plunge in the markets. Time magazine has named the Silence Breakers as the 2017 Person of the Year. They represent the women who triggered a hashtag #MeToo. There's a national outcry over sexual harassment. One of President Trump's favorite hashtags is fake news. It's part of his crusade against what he thinks is a biased media. Last week, that battle took an unusual turn right down Wall Street. President Trump said on Twitter people who lost money when the stock market went down 350 points based on the false and dishonest reporting of Brian Ross of ABC News, he has been suspended, should consider hiring a lawyer and suing ABC for the damages this bad reporting has caused, many millions of dollars. We're joined by Jay Richards, assistant professor in the School of Business and Economics at the Catholic University of America. He's also a host of The Force for Good right here on EWTN. Welcome back.
Great to be with you, Lauren.
Let's talk about this incident. You have said that few people probably lost money from that little blip in the stock market. Why would someone sue even if they have lost some money?
Well, I mean, the reality is that anything surprising that happens is going to create a dip in the market. Markets like stability. And so Brian Ross's story on Friday morning, turns out it was wrong. He said that Mr. Flynn had met before President Trump was even elected with Russian diplomats. Turns out it was totally false. It was after he was elected as a president-elect, you know, he has representatives that met with Russia. It's now perfectly normal. The result, though, during the day on Friday is a big dip on the market. But if you look at what happened on Monday, we got another all-time high. And so unless somebody was foolish enough to actually sell a bunch of stocks, say, Friday afternoon, it's very unlikely anybody lost money.
Global markets on election night took a hit when President Trump was announced as president. It steadied, it closed sharply higher. President Trump has been in office for just a year, and it appears that Wall Street loves him.
Absolutely. I mean, the reality is when he was elected, he was a complete unknown. It wasn't predicted that it would happen. So again, it's a total surprise. But between the stuff he's done on regulation, the things especially that he's done and not done, he had threatened to blow up trade deals, for instance. He hasn't done that. And so if you look, not at his tweets so much at his actual policies, I think it's been very business-friendly and very good for the economy.
So President Trump, you're saying, is good for the economy?
I think that's absolutely true, and I think the market reflects that. I mean, this is four all-time highs of 1,000, first time ever in 2017 during his first year. So I think the markets seem to love what he's doing.
You talk about Catholic social teaching and the way that it can be applied to business.
Yes.
How could Catholic social teaching be applied to stock markets? Is there any connection there? It seems to me like, no, I don't think so.
No, absolutely. First, in the companies that you invest in. If you yourself are an investor, an institutional investor, there are things just simply as Christians that we don't want to be involved in. But also, we should want, all things being equal, the market to do well. It's not just about Wall Street. If the market's doing well, that's also good for ordinary people on Main Street.
Thank you so much, Jay Richards, for coming by the program, host of A Force for Good right here on EWTN.
Thanks.
Thank you. A new wildfire erupts in downtown Los Angeles as firefighters battle to control 3 others across Southern California. Fire is close to the Getty Center, an arts complex, and to UCLA. 200,000 people have been evacuated. Attempts to fight the fires have been hampered by the same winds that are spreading them. Water-dropping planes find it too dangerous to fly. Nearly 200 homes have been destroyed. The largest and most destructive fire is in Ventura County. It is 85 square miles. Thomas Aquinas College evacuates all of its students and cancels classes for the week. The school says on Twitter, "We're very heartened by all the gracious prayers and generous offers of help. May God bless you all." Up next, a conservative perspective. One of the movement's greatest voices tells us about his life in the halls of power. And an unusual relic. Canada is set to welcome the remains of one of history's greatest missionaries. One of the founding members of the Jesuit order baptized countless Christians, and now St. Francis Xavier's arm will be on view. A relic of the Jesuit priest's severed arm is traveling from Rome to Canada, thanks to the group Catholic Christian Outreach. St. Francis Xavier served as a missionary in Asia in the early 1500s. It's considered a first-class relic, and that means it's the body or fragment of a saint. To learn more on when and where the relic will be, plus other Catholic news of the day, turn to our partners at CatholicNewsAgency.com. Historian and author Lee Edwards followed in his father's footsteps and became a journalist in Washington. Since then, however, he has forged his own path, from working on the Barry Goldwater campaign to taking a strident stand against communism. And he has written a new book. He has been guided all along by his Catholic faith and conservative principles. Lee Edwards joins us now in studio. Welcome to the program.
My pleasure to be here.
So happy to have you. You're one of the most prominent voices in the conservative movement. The New York Times calls you, what did they say? The voice of the silent majority.
Well, that was a long time ago.
Yeah, well, it's probably still true. You helped found Young Americans for Freedom as well. You've had just a huge impact on this movement. But it is today badly divided, isn't it, on issues such as big government and health care. Is that true?
Well, it is divided, but of course conservatives have always been verbal brawlers. They're always duking it out like the Hatfields and the McCoys. Between the libertarians way back when I first got into the movement and traditional conservatives. So what we have today is not just three particular strains of conservatism, but maybe as many as 8 or 9 different ones. So to try to get everybody to agree is that much more difficult. But at the same time, it seems to me that having so many different strains is an indication just how powerful and vital the movement is.
You wrote Ronald Reagan's biography when he was governor of California, soon after he was governor. What would Ronald Reagan make of Donald Trump's Republican Party?
Well, I think he would be a little bit, well, I don't think that's quite the way to bring people together. Reagan was famous for his 11th commandment, thou shalt not speak ill of any other Republican. And of course, Mr. Trump violates that daily. But at the same time, I think that Reagan would see something very similar in Trump, and that is his appeal to the people. We call it populism today, but it was the silent majority and the moral majority back when Reagan was running. So to me, that populist element has always been part of the conservative movement and the Republican Party.
You teach politics at Catholic University. What accounts for the devotion of evangelical voters to President Trump, even though he had a wealthy New York lifestyle and his approaches to politics aren't exactly what we were talking about, the way Ronald Reagan's were? Well,
I think, sort of in terms of issues, Mr. Trump is very pro-life, and that's important. He is for a limited government, non-interference in religious affairs. And I think that he received the support he did because he reached out to the evangelicals. He said, look, I would like your support. He actively sought their help, yes. Mm-hmm. And that makes a big, big difference because evangelicals have gotten a little bit beaten up in the political arena in the last 10, 15 years.
Well, the conventions of television require that we leave you now. However, I would like to continue this discussion. I'm an admirer of yours and appreciate you coming by EWTN News Nightly. Lee Edwards, author of Just Right, A Pursuit of Liberty.
Pleased to be here.
And finally, today is the feast of St. Nicholas of Bari, beloved in the Catholic and Orthodox churches. And many believe he is the original Santa Claus. Legend has it, if you leave your shoes outside on his feast day, in the morning they will be filled with treats. Our viewers show us that is true. Here's how they're celebrating. Mary DiMarzo's children left their shoes by the door, and then they had presents and candy. Marie Brazil's treats made it all the way inside. Looks like they're on the kitchen counter. St. Nicholas was particularly busy at Heather Jarrick's office, or house rather. He found enough goodies to fill 7, count them, 7 sets of shoes. We thank you so much for your submissions. Please send more to our Facebook page. For all of us here at EWTN News Nightly, to all of you around the world, thank you for watching. I'm Lauren Ashburn. We'll be back tomorrow with more news from a Catholic perspective. Good night, and God bless you.